I'm here to talk about the culture of innovation because I think even if you're in a startup, it's very important that you have implemented some of the philosophies that I'm going to talk about, because if you're going to sustain your innovation and grow as a company, you really need to pay attention. And I learned all these lessons because I worked at Eastman Kodak for 38 years. And my job at Eastman Kodak was to be an intrapreneur. That is, I worked in the advanced development group. I had to come up with new product and service ideas for the company. Later on, I moved into what was called the System Concept Center, where we were charged with coming up with new business ideas for the company. Now, of course, there's going to be several stories that you might hear about Eastman Kodak, and I'm sure people have written about it extensively. And I just want to tell you today that I'm here as one of the 6 blind people in this Hindu proverb that are trying to describe to you an elephant. So if you were to talk to any one of the other people from Kodak who were also trying to describe the elephant, you might find a different story from them. So I'm going to tell you my story, and then you can take my story as you would. So I worked in the hardware groups mostly, working on cameras, projectors. But one of the first lessons I learned at Kodak, the first week I was there, was that we got indoctrinated into the Kodak system, right? And so we would go and sit in a room, and they would tell us stories about George Eastman and how George Eastman ran the company. Well, George Eastman started the company in 1870. He died in 1932. I'm coming to the company in 1970. This is 40 years later. They're still telling stories about what would George have done. So you can see that it's very important that you have these stories to help you maintain those innovations. And that comes from leadership. So even if you're doing a startup, your culture will be determined by your leaders, and it's important that you have one that's sustainable. In 1910, the logo for Eastman Kodak kind of looked like the EKC you see there. For the whole time I worked at Kodak, it looked like the one in the middle. When Antonio Perez came to us from Spain to be our CEO, we changed it to have the little change in the A in the Kodak, but still Kodak was known around the world for its yellow and red colors. This is George Eastman. That's the first picture of him basically in 1870. He was a teller in a bank, and he was going to go on holiday, and his friends suggested to him that he ought to take some pictures while he was on holiday. And in 1870, in order for you to take pictures, you basically had to take a whole truckload of a wagon load of equipment. So you had to have this big box, and you had a lens, and you had to have chemicals to mix, and you had to coat your own plates. You didn't buy plates, you didn't buy film. You coated your own plates, and you developed your own plates, and you made your own pictures. So when George got back, he actually didn't take the trip. But after discovering about how hard it was, he decided that he should try to make something that made photography simpler, because everybody would like to take pictures. The one in the middle is the picture that we most recognize George with in anything that we saw at Eastman Kodak. That would have been in the probably 1920s that he looked like that. And then in the 1932 he passed away. He had had some type of a disease, and he just said, my work is done, and he ended himself. So that was George Eastman. But he left a legacy, again, that lasted another 80 years. So one of the first stories that you hear about Kodak, and as a camera designer, one of the tenets that we always had is, you push the button, we do the rest. That's how Kodak does it. That's how George did it. So if you're going to invent a new camera or any kind of system, it better be as simple as, you push the button, we do the rest. So we would repeat that to ourselves, even though this is something that happened in 1880. It had lasted over 100 years. On the right-hand side, that is one of the pictures from one of the first Kodak cameras. that camera came with enough film, they called it film, for 100 pictures, but it really wasn't acetate film at that time, it was paper. And you took the exposure on paper, you sent the whole camera back to Kodak, and they pulled it out, they oiled up the paper so that you could print through it, and then sent you your pictures back. And that in 1880 cost $25. So it wasn't a product for everyone, but it was the first start. And the pictures were round. Then George wanted to take, of course, the product to the masses, and that meant teaching kids how to take pictures. So they came up with a brownie. It would cost $1, and it was decorated with those little cartoon characters. Now the lead camera engineer at the time, his name was Frank Brownell. People thought the brownie was named after him, but it was not. And the product itself was not brown, it was black. So it was really named after the pixies that you see there, and they were popular cartoon characters that were created by a woman in Canada at that time. Next up is the Kodak autographic, and one of the messages that you learn about Kodak is even though we thought we invented everything, we didn't. In fact, George bought a lot of the inventions that he ended up putting in product, and this is a prime example. The autographic had a little slider in the back, and it had a little stylus so that you could write anything you wanted on the by opening that little door, write on it, and then that whatever you wrote will end up on the print. So you could write your date, the name of the people, and this is a feature that is even hard to get today. I mean, digitally you got to go back and redo something, right? Well, it was on those cameras in the 1910, 1920 era, and he put it, it was so popular, he put it into every camera they made. But again, it was something that he bought. The next one up is the one of the first 35 millimeter cameras, as we think of it. It had the disposable 35 millimeter can. Just prior to this, Leica had a product where you had a reloadable can, but and again, it was a feature that George bought from somebody else. So we were all about innovation, and that's what this whole conference is about, right? And we lived that every day at Kodak. We moved into movies, and the way we did movies started actually with a gentleman named Mulridge, and there was a bet at the time, and I believe he was in England, about whether a horse at full gallop would raise all of its hooves off the ground at the same time. So he set up 12 or 16 cameras along this racetrack with a string across the track, and as the horse went by, it would trip the camera, take a picture, and then they could see that clearly the hoofs did come off the ground. And then he put these pictures into what he called a zoetrope, and it was that thing that you've probably seen where you spin it and you can see the horse galloping. And that would have been one of the very first movies. Then there was this other inventor guy that George knew well, Thomas Edison, and he wanted to create movies for the masses. So Edison's company was working on the camera and the projector, but they needed a film. So they came to George Eastman and they said, we need a film. And the film that Kodak made at the time was still the 70 millimeter film that was put into that first Kodak. By this time we had acetate as a base for film, so you had the clear base, but we had to slit all of the 70 millimeter film in half, so that's how 35 millimeter film became 35. And Edison needed to have the sprocket holes on the side of the film, so even 35 millimeter cameras today, if you have one, still uses film with the sprocket holes, which actually have very little function in the camera. But it all came from Edison, Eastman working together, innovating together, and creating a whole new market. At that time, there was something called the consortium, and this was in around 1907. And in the consortium, they had people from Pathé, from France, and people in actually Boston, Massachusetts, where they made movies. And they also had the people that had the penny arcades, where they had those little movie things where you could flip around the flip pictures, and they wanted to put movies into them. So that whole group tried to control all of the movie market. Around 1910 or so, that consortium was broken up because Pathé secretly started selling film to some of the movie makers who had moved to Los Angeles, where the lighting was much better than Boston, and they started making movies there, and that's how the movie industry got to be in Hollywood. Anyway, the building on the left is the what we call Kodak Building Number 1. It's still there today, and that's where George started in Kodak Park. Kodak Park is where we made all the film. The center picture, I believe, is Sao Paulo. Does anybody know for sure? When I searched it on the internet, that's the picture they gave me. So that's the Kodak supposedly headquarters in Sao Paulo. The one on your right then is Kodak office today, and it's still there. We share some of that, or they share some of that building. I retired, but with some of our MCC is our Monroe Community College, and there are other companies in there, and there are other companies in a lot of the other facilities, those facilities that we didn't blow up during the bankruptcies. So innovation was not limited to the products that we sold. Innovation actually was in everything that we did. Every process that we did, whether it was processing how the mail was delivered, or how you stored the parts for your products into the warehouse, or whether it was how you manufactured film. Now, I wasn't able to get a lot of pictures of how we manufactured film. They were largely secrets at that time. We did not have patent those things. We kept them secret. And of course, we made our film in the dark. So not a lot of pictures. But that's what they would have looked like, and would have been a paper manufacturing equipment. The one in the middle is there to represent our foray into instant. In instant cameras, we tried to do that in the late 70s, and we introduced our own instant pictures. We built equipment that was top to bottom. We put sensitized rolls of film in a top of this 4-story building. We had to match filters to each batch of film. We'd then roll that together, slice it, and cut it up, and add the little pouch that had the chemicals in that would develop the picture when you put it through the camera. And then out the bottom of this 4-story building would come little packets of instant film that we would put into a full envelope, a foil envelope, put it into a carton, put it into a case, put it in a pallet, put it in a truck, and ship it. So end to end, we were very conscious of making the absolute most vertically integrated manufacturing systems that we could, and that was true of all the processes we had at Kodak. Kodak even grew the cows that we used to get the hooves to make the film base and bring it to Kodak Park from Connecticut. So end to beginning, we tried to make everything we could. So those things were all embedded in our culture, and it's critical to have that, because if everybody in your company has to run around every day and say, gee, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I go over and help this other guy? And then you had to roll that up through your chain of command and have the answer come back down to you, you wouldn't get anything done. You'd be spending your whole time questioning your management about whether this is okay to do or not. When I was at Kodak, if you got requested because you knew something special by another person in another department, and you went and helped them, that was perfectly fine. In fact, you were rewarded, because at the end of the day, you were helping Kodak. And as long as you could say you were doing something that was positive, helping Kodak, typically that would be a positive for you. So that was part of our culture. We wanted to innovate everything. In fact, we didn't like the calendar. Everybody likes months in their calendar. We didn't like them because it wasn't very good for the manufacturing process. It wasn't very good for the employees who like to get paid. It wasn't very good for anybody that tried to plan anything in the company. So we, George, invented a new calendar for us. We called them periods. And if you take 52, divide it by 13, you'll find out there's 4 weeks in a period and 52 weeks in a year, and it works out quite nicely. And it lets you plan and schedule. I think the whole world should adopt this system, and so we don't have these odd, even numbers of months. We were one of the first to put in a suggestion system. In our suggestion system, you could put in something as mundane as changing the way they serve the food in the cafeteria to adding some new materials to what we put in our film when it went to manufacture. And then if there was a benefit from having implemented your idea, you got to share in the money. So if you did something in the film, you could get up to $50,000 or $100,000 as a bonus for having put in that suggestion. So it was a very popular thing. We also fully integrated our factories. I worked at the Elm Grove plant, which was largely making equipment, cameras, printers. And we had ESL, which is our Eastman Savings and Loan. So the bank was right there. The cafeteria was right there. The company store was right there where they sold all the stuff that we made. And we made some really strange stuff. Like Tennessee Eastman invented super glue back in the 70s. And the only place you could buy it was at the Kodak company store. We also made vitamins. We made, of course, our film products and all those things. So all you had to do is go to the company store on your way to lunch and pick those things up. We also ran a very big recreation group. I took benefit of that. I played a lot of baseball and a lot of basketball. I still play basketball. And I still play basketball with some of my friends that I learned from at Eastman Kodak. In fact, for a while they were calling my team the Eastmans because we had so many Kodak guys. But we've had all of those things right in place in each of the sites that Kodak had. It wasn't just here. We had very similar. I visited Pathé in France. I got 10 minutes? Wow, okay. And we visited in Germany, and it was pretty much like that everywhere. Again, innovating and making us progress. You don't need to see much of this, but that's one of my early days at Kodak. That's about when I graduated from Kodak in 2008, and that was last year at RIT. One of the first products I worked on was a 110 carousel projector. I was a draftsman. I had just gotten out of the Marines, and I needed a job. I went to Kodak, and I said, well, I got drafting jobs open. I said, okay, I'll take that. Turns out I could do it pretty well, so I moved there from there, but I figured out that everybody in the row of drafting boards I was in had been there 40 years, and I didn't see myself being there in 40 years, so I went back to school, worked full-time, went to school full-time, and graduated. They moved me into the advanced development group where I enjoyed pretty much the rest of my career. My first camera and my first patent were in the Pocket 508. It was a dual lens camera. I worked 6 years on what was the disc camera system. The important part of that is that this was the first product you could buy with a lithium battery in it, and this is in 1979, 1980. And the beautiful part about that is that you had a lifetime guarantee on the battery. There was no charger for this battery. If you shot enough film through that camera to wear out the battery, we owed you a new camera because we made money on the film, we made money on the photo finishing, and the camera was just the handle to the razor, right? This is a razor blade model. So there's a number of other innovations there. The flow molded lenses that went into all the CD players that came after that. So again, the culture of innovation, advancing your technology, and then applying that technology wherever it fits and meets the customer need. I also thought during Mavica shock, which happened in 1983 when we thought Sony was going to put us out of the film business because of what they did with Betamax, I invented the digital or the trim printer. We could take any digital or video signal in and make a print. From there, unfortunately, we lost the Polaroid suit, 2 months before we shipped, and we had to destroy all the equipment. But again, the technology from that CRT exposure went into our next film system, the APS film system, and got used there. So it lived on. This is the first dye sub printer from Kodak. This would have been in about 1989. It made a 4x5 print from digital signals, and it was one of our first products that had a microprocessor in it. For the Gulf War I, we had to make the 7700, which was a printer that made a 11x11 black and white and colors, but they needed those black and whites for the jet pilots to put in their cockpits. But it wasn't, again, innovation limited to product. Here's the Epcot Center at Walt Disney World in Florida. They had a whole building called the Hall of Imagination, and Figment of Your Imagination was a Kodak sponsored character, and we did a lot of marketing for Kodak, trying to encourage kids to be more creative, more innovative as they came through Epcot. So how do you get great innovations? You got to have great people. I'm going to point out one of them. There was 120,000 of us at Kodak when I was there. I was going to point out Steve Sasson. He was one of my basketball buddies, but he's also the inventor of the digital camera. He's received the Medal of Honor from President Obama, and that is a picture of the first digital camera in 1975. It made a picture that was 100 pixels by 100 pixels, black and white, and everybody at Kodak that saw it said, "Oh, nothing to worry about here." Film is so much better than that, you know. But we knew. So the first digital camera, Kodak made it for Apple, and it was the Apple QuickTake. We also made our first professional camera. We took Nikon backs, and then we put our own sensors in it. We made our own sensors at that time. And then we went on to be #1 in digital camera sales for many years in the 2000s. This is the 8650. It was another dye sub printer that actually Steve Sasson was the project lead on. That became the printer that went in all the kiosks, and the kiosk business for Kodak became $2.5 billion a year, and it was a very big business for us. We invented things like the color filter array. If you have a digital camera on you right now, you have one of these color filters arrays that was invented by a man named Bayer in the research labs at Kodak. We also have OLEDs. In the 80s, we thought that we were going to need solar panels everywhere, so we thought we could convert all of our factory from making film to making solar panels, flexible panels, and we were playing with these organic LED materials, and we found out they worked in reverse just as well or better, and that became the product that's technology that's in OLED TVs that you can buy today. So, stories. Stories maintain us. In case you didn't know, we are also the ones that took that picture because we put our cameras in satellites. We also had a very famous system that we couldn't talk about till a couple years ago. This took pictures in space on 5-foot rolls of film, 5 foot wide. It cuts off pieces of film, put it in a container, threw it out of the satellite, and then we would catch it in a cargo net that was run out of a plane in Hawaii. And we had a like 70-80% success rate in catching those. And that was before computers. This was in the late 60s, right? So you also have seen pictures from space. Kodak designed the Hubble spacecraft lens system. They unfortunately hired somebody else to put it in space. It didn't work, so Kodak had to go back and fix it. So again, my story, I'm just one of the blind people here telling you their story about Kodak. I'm sure you'll hear others. But remember, for the innovation of culture, that leadership creates it, people practice it, stories maintain it, and that's how you get your culture of innovation. So I have an epilogue, and I think we have a couple more minutes, because I took all this learning that I got over 38 years to the Rochester Institute of Technology. And there, as you might guess, there are several of us ex-Kodak people that are working and teaching at the Simone Center Right now, I'm the lead innovation coach. We have maybe 100 teams a year. My responsibility is to coach some of those teams and to provide coaches, individual coaches for those teams. So I have several that from Xerox or from Kodak or other companies in town. But everybody gets a coach, somebody that's done a startup business. And our team looks like this. This is our group. We have a fairly small group for handling 100 teams a year, but it's not just teams. We also have programs. We have a summer start program that Mauricio went through. We pay you to work on your idea. We also have Studio 930, which is a group of industrial designers that support the summer start. We have an innovation challenge grant where you can get money to work on your ideas. We have a construct, or our own makerspace at RIT. We have competitions. Tiger Tank is our version of the Shark Tank. We just had finals last night. Unfortunately, I wasn't there, but we had 5 teams pitch for 8 minutes each. Grand prize was an MBA scholarship, so that's about $60,000 worth of grand prize. We also have business model competitions where you can win $5,000, and you win the right to go to the state competition where you can win up to $100,000. I had a young lady last spring that I coached, and she won the new product category and $10,000. We have Idea Lab. That's where we bring in problems from the community, people that work with disabilities, clients, or people at the Rochester Regional Health System, and we get multidisciplinary teams of students put together to help solve those problems in a weekend. If the solution looks good, then the client, we move on with that through our other programs. We have one day that's the best day of the year. You can go to RIT and see 400 or 500 projects, all types in one day. Fine arts to plays to new technology to we're the head of 3D printing for all of New York State. There's just a wonderful day. I'm an idea junkie personally, so I kind of freak out on that day and overload. But we also run I-Core programs for NSF. We run both a node and a site where you can get money. You can get $50,000 to work on your project. Now I'm going to conclude with this little slide about the culture of innovation. Doesn't anyone have an idea? Well, you could give us less work and stop criticizing every idea. Does anyone have a suggestion that isn't ridiculous? Okay. I'm sure you've all seen this. The other reason I like to put this one up is because Scott Adams actually worked at Eastman Kodak, and my former boss, Dr. Paxton, tells me that Alice was actually a real person at Kodak, and it was his secretary. So that's what I have.
I'd like to know how a Brazilian startup could get in one of those programs. Is it possible? Do you have any cases like that?
Well, certainly you could come to RIT as a student, which Mauricio did, and Tiago. Other ways to get into our programs, we have Venture Creations is our other incubator. That is for people that have graduated or have some other connection to RIT. So if you had a connection to RIT, there is an incubator there.
What is the worst difficult that you have to be had to be in a coach now? What is the worst difficult that you have to be in a coach?
Oh, the most difficulty being a coach? Sometimes there are students who think they know all the answers, and if they already know all the answers, then I cannot help them. But we are very big on using the business model canvas, the Steve Blank system of going out doing a lot of customer discovery. So if we have an engineering student that comes in and says, I got the exact thing that they need, and I'm going to build it, and I said, well, how many customers have you talked to? He says, well, I talked to my mom and dad, they liked it. Then those are they're hard to coach. And if I can't coach them, that's all right. They can go ahead and do what they want. But we do try to embrace them in the process. Yes.
Did you see the cell phones coming, and what did Kodak do about the cell phones?
Well, as you know, I worked in the advanced development group, and in the 90s, I had a project where we worked with Motorola in creating a cell phone with a camera in it. Yes. That project fell through. There was not agreements between Motorola and Kodak on who should be doing what. So we did not participate there, although we have put sensors and, of course, the filter arrays in all of the cell phone cameras. So we tried.